there, and welcome to White Women Wake Up. I'm Jonelle.
And I'm Karen. We're your co-hosts here to create space for honest, open, and sometimes messy conversations about what it means to wake up as white women in a world shaped by privilege, power, and cultural bias. Hey, Jonelle.
Hey, Karen.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
If you can't tell, I've got a sore throat, so I'm going to try to muddle along in our conversation, but hopefully I could be heard. I don't know. Anyways, we left off last week talking about cancel culture, and I'm not sure if you did any thinking about it in the last week, but I have, and not with culture at large, but more about canceling relationships. And so I've been thinking a lot about this idea of, if I'm going to cancel relationships in my small little world, what would I do in a big world, like in a culture at large? So, because one of the things I really liked what you said last week was this idea that with cancel culture, are we not making space for transformation? And so I had a tiff with a neighbor this week, and we both said our piece. And after I got off the phone, I wanted to completely cancel them. And it's really sticking to me. I can't tell you where it's going to go. I can't tell you what's going to happen, but I'm really been thinking, we're here to think, we're here to learn, we're here to grow.
Definitely.
I've been really thinking how quick I am. If I'm that quick to cancel people in my own relationships that are near me, how easy it would be to cancel other people. So I'm trying to hold on to this language of redemption and transformation. Anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there.
I love that. I think as a society, we don't offer enough redemption. And I don't know if society, because I do agree that cancel culture as a whole can really help strike down some people who have shown time and time again that they are not capable of growth. They are not capable of doing the right thing. And I think in that sense, canceling them is fair. But I agree with you. I think cancel culture has trickled into our close circles of life because it's with so many different views nowadays and sharp opinions. It's really easy just to say, I give up and I'm going to walk away from that relationship. And so, or cancel in a sense. But you're right, it doesn't leave space for growth or transformation or learning from one another. And it's not that it's easy, but good for you that you're going to...
I really liked your word trickle down because, it's interesting when we think about cancel culture, usually one of the reasons we're canceling people is we've made these people like demigods, right?
Yeah.
We've lauded them. Like one of the things you said last week was this idea that we don't need to listen to their music anymore, or we don't need to promote them in public spheres. And you're right, but you're right. It is this idea, are we now becoming so quick to cancel people in our own circles? So I'm going to work on that. I'm going to work on that language of canceling. I'm going to try not to cancel this person. I'm going to try to have boundaries around it, but it did make me think a lot this week around that. So thank you for bringing that up.
You brought it up. Glad you made you think.
Okay, so one of the things that Jonelle and I have talked about is we want these conversations to come at us really unfiltered because we want to be able to practice this language of hearing and listening the same way you or I would be in a conversation at a dinner party or with family and friends. And so the topic I'm going to bring up today is I don't know if Jonelle's going to disagree with me, but I would love to have some conversation around it. I was surprised, and I'm going to tell you, I'm a little bit embarrassed because I don't think this is a quiet subject. I think if I lived in the state of California, it's probably been pretty popular. I think perhaps if I listened to conservative news, I do know I hadn't really heard about it. And so I was kind of shocked. And so I did a little bit of a dive. I'm going to try to do the best I can to explain this. So what caught my eye was the state of California enacted, or the governor signed into law, what they're calling the Safety Act. And what the Safety Act is protecting transgender youth from giving transgender youth the freedom from having them being able to express their gender dysphoria to a teacher and not requiring that teacher to have to tell that parent. Did that make sense?
A little bit. So kind of backing up. So for context, what you're telling me is in the past, a student could identify at their preferred gender at school without the school notifying the parent.
Well,
correct?
I don't think it was in law. I think, but in practice, it started becoming policy.
And then, so now what you're saying is now it's required that that teacher tells the parent.
It's required based on school board policy. So this is part of the interesting thing about laws and understanding the tiers. As a higher education person in higher education, I'm guided by FERPA. So I don't need to tell parents anything, really. I mean, it is the adult student's prerogative to tell or not tell a parent. So when I read this, I was shocked from a teacher's standpoint that they're being asked by school board policy if a student comes to them and says, and it's not only gender dysphoria, it is also pronouns. If I want to be called a they, I as a teacher am required to tell a parent.
Okay.
So it was under policy, but I think what happened, and those of you who live in California would love to hear from you, a state legislator enacted a bill that would make it law.
Okay.
And they put this amendment within a bill that is coupled with mental health. And so in that sense, that requiring to ask a parent, it's for a student over the age of 12, makes sense. But then to hide this in that bill that also asks, that requires within 3 days, a teacher is required to tell a parent or a guardian what their student has identified as.
Okay, got it. I think I'm understanding it. So this is a tough one. And again, audience, this is why we're here, to have these hopefully shame-free, authentic conversations. So please give me grace as I kind of give my initial thoughts here. But I'm a little torn right now, so I'm going to talk through this. In one hand, from like a personal perspective, if I was a student and I was going through this and I didn't feel like home was a safe space, but I felt school was a safe place to be myself, I feel like it would be very difficult as a child going through this and as a person going through this. And so I understand and I see where the initial policies were in place to really protect that child's identity for mental health reasons for this.
Well, that's the Title IX. The Title IX policy actually is about transgender protections, but I don't think it's explicit in saying that that identity has to be told to a person.
Yeah.
So this is now school policy, where school policies are, not all schools, obviously, but many schools are making it policy that the teacher has to disclose this. So what I hear you saying is, as a child who might be afraid to tell their parent, you would be uncomfortable having a teacher required to have to say
totally.
this.
And I think so going from that perspective, that is really hard. And I understand Title IX still protects the rights, gender rights and transgender rights. But I think to your point of having to be outed essentially by a teacher to your parents is a pretty traumatizing experience. Now, on the other hand, and I'm sure a lot of listeners who are older, who are probably parents themselves, I'm sure feel very strongly about they would want to know what's going on with their 12-year-old. They would want to know what's going on with their 13-year-old and understand how they're presenting themselves at school. So I honestly don't know. And so I kind of asked you back, like, I know you're coming from the perspective of a teacher. I'm not a parent right now. how would you have felt when I was 13 if there was something that I was identifying as at school and you were completely unaware about it, but everyone else at school was? How would you feel not knowing?
Well, I know this is a challenge. I guess I'm thinking about it more from a teacher-student perspective.
Yeah.
Because I would think, and again, for those of you who are having this experience, it would be really interesting to hear your perspective.
Yeah.
Because part of what bothers me is that this is now being a policy and being asked of the teacher.
Well, and I agree with that.
Because I think it could say something like, if a teacher deems necessary, or if a student within conversation, a student and a teacher, but it doesn't feel like, I feel like some of these policies are lacking humanist approach. So I have to be honest. I work at a Christian university, and my students, I've had students that will come out, and not many, I'm not going to say those kind of words, but I have had a few that have talked about suicide because they had to approach or felt that they should approach their conservative parent. That's a really scary situation to be in. And I guess that I don't know why. There's got to be a reason that the student isn't telling the parent to begin with. And so is there another way to do this that isn't around policy and bills and laws that bring parents and families together?
Well, you said something interesting there when you said the bills and policy and laws, because I do think that is the tougher part in this, because like if we really break it down from like a holistic view of like, we're in a perfect society. Yes, of course, the parents want to know what's going on with their kids. But the reality is most parents who have, I would say, and I don't want to say a strong connection because all parents have connection with their kids, but most parents who have an open dialogue household would know what is happening with their children. They would have a completely strong understanding of or if they didn't know, they would also trust their child enough that they know that what the decisions their child is making is not harmful to themselves in the moment. And so you're right, by doing this policy, it does almost feel like it's helping to protect the parents that don't know how to have open conversations with their kids.
And actually may want to punish their kid for having these gender dysphoria.
And again, that's a generalization. Yeah. So like I'm not saying...
So it's interesting because... So I looked at some data, which is fascinating, like Pew Research and some other areas about when is the average age for someone to have gender dysphoria. And the research is a little bit all over there, but they do say it presents itself as early as 5 and ranging to 12. And I know gender dysphoria and being queer and gay isn't the same thing, but another research that I looked at said, on average, people understand that they are queer around the age of 12. Some of the research I read said that most young persons don't really want to come out to their parents until they're around 18. But they're also saying that data can be a little bit skewed because as we're becoming more affirming in our culture, younger people are becoming more comfortable coming out.
That makes total sense.
But it feels to me that you have these young people that are dealing with a culturally challenged issue. They find a safe adult in a school counselor, a teacher, a school community, if that school is safe, and then they're not ready to come out to family and friends until their later teens.
Oh my gosh,
it just feels really, when I read that, I thought, oh, good for California for making this law. But then what I wanted to go deeper into is, why did that law exist to begin with? Where is the respect and the humanity within that space?
Well, and you brought up a great point that I honestly didn't even think about. You're right. In my mind, I'm visualizing that this child who is going by different pronouns, or this child is going, identifies it as a different gender, is out to like everyone in the school and is proud. Like in my mind, this is what I'm visualizing. But you're right. This law it could just be talking to one teacher privately.
Yes.
About what is going on with them. And then that teacher is now required to say something. Oh, yeah, I am. So the more and more we talk about this, the more that is very harmful.
Yes, they're requiring within 3 days, if a student came to me, I would need to tell a parent. And I guess it kind of goes back to, this idea of human laws versus, or humanity versus, I as a teacher, I see myself in a space where I'm talking to a young person. They're vulnerable. Maybe they even wrote something in an essay that demonstrated vulnerability. And all of a sudden, that privacy is no longer there.
Yeah.
And it's not even that the parent is asking me. I then become required. So I guess what our conversation that we're having is one of the actually things that humbled me more in the conversation is, as a white woman who's liberal, who listens to liberal media, I don't realize what actually is going on around me. I kind of just am responding to sound bites as well. And I'm assuming things like Title IX are protecting people. And then I'll find out that there's these school boards that indeed are not. And so what am I doing to go a little bit beyond my privilege and my status?
Well, I also think it's and lack of education around what Title IX protects. So when you initially brought it up, to me, this didn't feel like a Title IX protection, because the Title IX protections are all still in place. I think what this issue is, and so I think that it is interesting that they did put it within a mental health bill, is because it sounds to me like they're trying to associate it in the same way as if a student were to come and say, they had a dream about killing people in the school. So of course a teacher, a counselor is required to bring that up and say something, and so they're kind of associating the same thing as gender identity is the same thing as safety. And that's where it gets, I agree with you, because if a student brought up that they had depressive thoughts but not suicidal thoughts, I don't think a counselor is required to tell a parent that. But so this is really interesting. So this is, again, it's not a self-harm thing, and that's why it's hard. So where's the line around harm for a student? I think the thing is the law really should play into, again, if we're looking at mental health, the line has always been around self-harm or harm for others. And if them identifying as a different gender is not harming themselves.
It feels like we're inviting them.
It does feel like we're inviting harm.
Mental health harm.
Yeah.
So one of the things that also, me, it takes me down these little rabbit holes, right? I started thinking, this is the dilemma of my privilege, my generation, and I'm going to speak from I, not we, but I, because so many policies and laws have benefited me, I still run with this assumption, and that's kind of saying that I'm completely dumb. I know we're going to talk about abortion laws and things like that, but I'm talking about these laws that are kind of embedded that I'm not paying attention to, because I'm assuming that there's kind of a civility that human beings are having towards one another. But I forget that policies have always benefited me as a white, the word white Anglo-Saxon Protestant keeps coming up in my lexicon as we've started this dialogue. So,
and also cisgender.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess it was really, I don't know if we're going to have, I don't know if there's any more conversation around this, but maybe the conversation is digging deeper. Maybe the conversation is what made me aware to look at this even is just that we're trying to have conversations around these tough topics, and we're not media and we're not trying to do sound bites. We're trying to really think about it.
I think my kind of takeaway from this is, where in society can we actually like figure out how to have conversations with each other or our children or our family, instead of create regulations to force conversations or create regulations to force things? And again, I know I'm still saying this from the perspective of someone who's not a mother. And so I completely understand how my opinion has a different variance to it. And I'm more speaking from the perspective of potentially like how I would have felt as a student. And I can completely understand how a parent, just out of the love for their children, wants to know everything that's going on with them. But I think always in these conversations, I think the thing that I encourage everyone to do is, instead of projecting yourself on someone else, instead of projecting your own opinions on things, take time to sit back and analyze how you would feel if the situation was reversed. And I think that's like the number one thing I try to do when conversations are tricky is, okay, how can I think through this person's perspective to gain maybe more context for my side? Like, does that help me see just, I don't know, more into there so we can find a middle ground of sorts?
I mean, clearly people were fighting this at, student boards and policies and things like that because they wanted to enact it. One thing that I like what you just said, Jonelle, is from a teacher's side, I just immediately went to the interaction with the student and how I felt so betrayed that I would be forced to say something that was really probably not an easy conversation for a student. And it just, I felt like immediately I would be put in a position of being a tattletale. And so I feel like a lot of these things are so against, and maybe they're just against human decency policies.
Again, I think what I'm trying to say here for audiences, that the listener that might have a different perspective of us, is, first of all, to be very clear, I am not for this bill. Like, the more that we've talked through it, the more I really feel like it is damaging to a lot of different people.
The bill, not the law, the amended bill. That's
the amended bill.
Yeah, you're for the new law that was enacted, the Safety Act.
The Safety Act, yes. Yeah. But the amended bill that states that a parent, or that it states that a teacher or a counselor has to give notification to a parent within 3 days of understanding that the child identifies by a different gender. That I do not agree with.
And I believe pronouns too.
And pronouns. So all of that I disagree with as I'm talking. But I think what I'm trying to say here is, I think the shoes, though, that we do need to put ourselves in, because I think this will only help these conversations, is the fear of the parent enacting this.
Yeah.
Because this really is coming from a place of fear. And it's coming, I think, honestly, probably from good intention of fear. Like, truly, parents who are well-meaning, I'm not saying everyone, but hopefully most of them are well-meaning and are coming from a place of fear. And so I think if we try to step into that, and I'm saying this again as a cis heterosexual woman, is it's my ability to be able to step into that because I'm not experiencing the oppression of someone who's queer or someone who identifies as different gender, so I can have the conversations to help support and be an ally to them. But I think if we step back and try to put our shoes on of the fearful parent, it might be able to help us open discussion to find a better middle ground, kind of like I was saying. And I think often we don't do that because we're just so shocked by their opinion, or it's something so drastically different than ours. But I genuinely believe that most people come from this from good intentions, and it's fear-based. And if we try to tackle some of that fear, can we come to a better position in
It's
life?
a great question. I think that's a something.
I don't know.
So maybe
Maybe it's a little idealistic,
yeah,
but I like
the call
to.
to
I mean,
action is to really identify what are we afraid of.
yeah,
You know, because with this fear, we're also then impeding on other relationships that could actually really be beautiful.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is just my own experience as a teacher and my own experience with my students in hard conversations that they enabled a trust to exist. They enabled some sort of growth to exist. Now, again, this is 18-year-olds, not 5-year-olds.
Yeah.
And yet, I mean, I would love in a perfect world that the student could process with the teacher and process with the family in a healthy way that's not enforced.
Yeah.
Because I think everyone should be part of the discussion. The enforcement is what's bothering.
But again, and I know we're getting over time, but like you're saying, it's the enforcement it's not to say that the student may not come to their parents eventually, but if you're forcing it, the conversation is going to be so much more painful. The situation is going to be so much more worse than if you naturally help guide a student or be their mentor there for a little bit.
And it could be dangerous if you're outing a student that lives in a family with abuse. It could also be incredibly dangerous.
Yeah. Wow. This was
Sorry.
No, that was
But
don't.
this
I
is
mean,
a
don't be
tough
sorry.
thing.
This
Yeah.
is the conversations.
Yeah.
These are the tough things I love for us to discuss. And again, we'd love people's perspectives. If you feel completely differently than us, if you have another opinion, we would love to hear your feedback.
And where are there policies that we're feeling like might really be hurting us and not helping us in the long run?
Yeah, what's happening in your state? Because we know there's a lot going on. So yeah, please let us know. Well, thank you again for joining us on White Women Wake Up. We hope today's conversation sparked some reflection and inspired you to engage with the world in a new and more thoughtful way. Remember, it's a journey about learning, unlearning, and showing up with authenticity. If you like this episode, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and connect with us on social media. Again, we'd love to hear your thoughts. But until next time, stay open, stay curious, and just keep waking up.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. The facts and policies shared and discussed in this podcast came from Pew Research Institute and the California Legislative Information website.